How did Thailand build a system in which sincere devotion and legal compulsion become indistinguishable? Thailand is a country with one of the most sophisticated national survival strategies in the world. A strategy that shapes everything: the food, the faith, the politics, the tourism, its people's very disposition. And it starts, as most things in Thailand do, with the throne and the temple. I stepped outside Bangkok's airport for the first time, and my brain just froze. The second the cab left the airport, I was surrounded by music blasting from tuk-tuks and the whine of scooters threading between cars. Look, I grew up in Miami. I genuinely thought I knew what a hot, loud, chaotic city felt like. But Bangkok makes Miami feel like a library. I basically became the spinning rainbow wheel of death on a Mac. My nervous system was just trying to keep up. I had a night tour booked as soon as I landed, so thankfully, all I had to do was show up. The tour guide was sharp, enthusiastic, and visibly proud of his city. He moved us through the historic streets to gawk at the temples lit up in gold. The scale of everything was awe inspiring. And then he started talking about the royal crematorium. He described it with reverence, how it cost $90 million to build, how it was used only once for the late king, how elaborate it was, how architecturally significant, how it represented the nation's devotion to the monarchy. All I heard was $90 million used once. My tour guide then gathered his colleagues in a circle. Before we knew it, they were singing the full official name of Bangkok.
กรุงเทพมหานครมหินทรายุทธยามหาดิลกภพนพรัตน์ราชธานีบุรีรมย์อุดมราชนิเวศน์มหา
At 168 letters and around 43 syllables, it has the Guinness World Record for being the longest place name in the world. I was getting a kick out of it, sure, but mostly I was confused because I'd come to Thailand with a certain picture in my head: the warmth, the smiles, the Buddhism. But what I was encountering on that first night felt more like grandiosity, excess for the sake of excess. Like I was being shown a very specific version of Thailand held up to the light at a very specific angle. But something about the story felt incomplete. As my time in Thailand wore on and I shifted from the jam packed streets of Bangkok to the much quieter, more rural pace of Chiang Rai, I started noticing a divide between locals and visitors, a layer between what we were being shown and what actually lived underneath it. The tour guide on that first night in Bangkok was describing a Thailand of monuments, royal devotion, and national pride. And simultaneously, I was thinking about the westernized version of Buddhism I'd absorbed my whole life: a religion built on the release of attachment, on impermanence, on the understanding that earthly excess leads to suffering. And here was a $90 million building used once in honor of a king, and it was seen as a religious act. It felt like Plato's cave. We were being shown the shadows, beautiful shadows, impressive shadows, carefully arranged shadows, but shadows nonetheless. And I wanted to understand what was casting those shadows. That curiosity sent me down a rabbit hole. And it starts, as most things in Thailand do, with the throne and the temple. If you're curious about how history, culture, and politics shape the world around us, from the streets of Medellin, Colombia to the night markets of Taiwan, like this video, subscribe to Globocurious, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Between 90 and 95% of Thais practice Theravada Buddhism, one of the oldest surviving forms of the religion. It's built around mindfulness, impermanence, and the release of worldly attachment. And yet, opulent temples, a 5.5-ton solid gold statue of Buddha, a prominent monk with a nice car, a driver, and a coach wristlet. A true story I'll tell you about soon. To understand how those things can coexist, you first have to understand what Theravada Buddhism actually is and how it differs from the Buddhism most Westerners have in their head. Most of the Buddhism that filtered into Western popular culture came through the Mahayana tradition, the branch that spread north and east into China, Japan, Korea, and Tibet. Mahayana is the tradition of the Bodhisattva, the enlightened being who delays their own final liberation in order to help all other sentient beings reach it first. It's devotional and expansive. It focuses on compassion as a universal force. When Westerners talk about Buddhist meditation, Zen, or the Dalai Lama, this is the world they're drawing from. Theravada is older. It calls itself the teaching of the elders, a claim to preserving the original teachings of the historical Buddha more faithfully than what followed. It spread south to Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos, and Thailand. Where Mahayana expanded the cast of characters with bodhisattvas, celestial Buddhas, and elaborate cosmologies, Theravada stayed closer to the original architecture. The path to liberation, according to Theravada Buddhism, is primarily the monk's path. Lay people support the monkhood through offerings and generosity, and in turn accumulate merit that improves their standing in the cycle of rebirth. Enlightenment is understood to be a very long project, like a multi lifetime project. Most people aren't there yet, so all they can do is live ethically, give generously, and earn better conditions for their next life. In theory, then, Theravada is stricter. A Theravada monk's 227 rules, or patimokkha, include celibacy, not handling gold and silver, and not eating after noon. The image Theravada projects itself is one of radical simplicity: an orange robe, an alms bowl, the quiet accumulation of merit through discipline and practice. But the reality in Thailand is considerably more complicated than that. And I know this because of that coach wristlet I mentioned earlier. A couple years before this trip, I had gone on a date with a Thai man back home in Atlanta. He was a former monk, which I'd later find out was much more common than you might think. When I told him I was going to Bangkok, he connected me with his best friend who was still an active monk there. A prominent one, apparently, like regularly called upon to lead ceremonies for the royal family kind of prominent. I walked from my hotel in Bangkok's Chinatown to the temple where the monk lives. I passed several buildings of monk housing until a glimpse of orange approached on my right. It was my monk guide for the day. He clutched a designer wallet in one hand and a smartphone in the other. We used a translation app to exchange hellos while walking to the shiny black car that was waiting for us, with his young driver already behind the wheel. At one point, I leaned in to touch him, something deeply ingrained in my Latin American heritage, after which he calmly told me that monks cannot be touched. Oops. We had planned a day trip to Ayutthaya, the ancient capital of Thailand, then known as Siam, that had been sacked by the Burmese in 1767. We spent the day moving through the Ayutthaya ruins. He was warm and curious. Soon, his driver was alerting us to the time. We had to get to lunch so that my new monk friend could eat before the noon deadline. When we stopped at a restaurant to eat, my monk friend sat down and his driver quickly steered me to another table. We weren't allowed to eat together. Then we visited the nearby museum. We walked through each exhibit together, eyeing the walls filled with gold treasures of all kinds, ceremonial pieces, objects of extraordinary delicacy, all dug up from the ancient ruins. We each pointed at our favorite pieces and smiled. He handed me the translation app, and it said, "I wish I could have all that gold." "Me too," I wrote back to him, and we laughed. Here was a man who had dedicated his life to a tradition that explicitly teaches the release of attachment to material things. A man who leads ceremonies for the Thai monarchy, steeped in centuries of teachings about the suffering caused by desire, standing next to me in a museum, coveting ancient gold. No shame about it, no performance of detachment, just a person. I liked him, I felt grateful. Even so, the juxtapositions were loud. A nagging feeling was growing inside of me, and it wasn't just because of my new monk friend. Every tour guide I met talked about Buddhism with the same reverence, in an almost practiced way. The most ornate temples were stunning, but also calibrated. Their grandeur felt less like an expression of inner spiritual life and more like a revenue generator. The whole thing had the texture of an Instagram installation dressed in the language of faithful devotion. I was invited to find peace there, but I was also very clearly being managed. That feeling crystallized when I started learning about what Thais call Mutelu, a booming faith economy built around temple admission tickets, amulets, and blessings sought explicitly for wealth, luck, and career advancement. As of 2024, Thailand's Department of Business Development had registered over 150 formal Mutelu businesses, and that's just the ones that filed paperwork. In his book, Capitalism Magic Thailand Modernity with Enchantment, scholar Peter Jackson describes these businesses and their consumers as cults of wealth, in which Indian deities, Chinese gods, Thai royal spirits, and magic monks have merged in commercial spaces to give market activity a sacred quality. I have to be honest, I found this deeply uncomfortable. There's something dissonant about a tradition that teaches the renunciation of desire operating at scale as a desire fulfillment industry. But how did this happen? How did Buddhism in Thailand become a fusion of spiritual authority with commercial transaction and political power? And why does Thai Buddhism feel less like a living faith and more like a very old, very well run brand? To understand the how and the why, you need the right historical context, and maybe even a love of musicals. Okay, I want to pause here for a second because I'm about to go deep into history and religion. I'm not a historian, nor am I Thai, but I did do some serious research and experienced a lot of this firsthand. So if I've gotten something wrong or missed a layer of nuance, drop it in the comments and I'll pin a correction. I'd much rather get it right than just sound right. All right, back to it. Every tour guide I had in Thailand, and I had several across multiple cities, spoke about King Rama V with immense pride, bordering on devotion. They all hit the same notes: the modernization, the diplomacy, the fact that Thailand alone had never fallen to colonizers. I heard about its so consistency that it started to feel rehearsed, like all these tour guides were reading from the same script. At the time, I found it a little unnerving. What I didn't yet understand was that, in a sense, the script was real. It had been written over a century ago and built into the national mythology. In Theravada Buddhist tradition, the ideal ruler is what's called a Dhammaraja, a righteous king who governs according to Buddhist principles and whose role is to protect and promote the faith. In Thailand, this concept became the ideological foundation of the monarchy itself. The king wasn't just a political leader, he was the living embodiment of Buddhist virtue. The throne and the temple became inseparable. What this meant practically was that supporting the monarchy became an act of religious devotion, and questioning the monarchy became something close to sacrilege. In this context, then, a $90 million crematorium for a king isn't excess, it's merit. Building it, funding it, attending it, these are all spiritually significant acts for a population that sees their king as the protector of their faith. The $90 million then wasn't spent despite Buddhist values. It was spent in service of a very particular interpretation of them. And that interpretation has been carefully maintained through law. In fact, Thailand has what legal experts consistently call the world's harshest lèse-majesté statutes, laws against criticizing the crown. Section 112 of the Thai Criminal Code states, "Whoever defames, insults, or threatens the king, the queen, the heir apparent, or the regent shall be punished with imprisonment of 3 to 15 years." And that's per offense, which means sentences stack. In 2021, a former civil servant named Anchan Prilert was initially sentenced to 87 years in prison for sharing audio clips on social media deemed critical of the monarchy. And under these laws, any citizen can file a complaint, and police are legally required to investigate, which means you have to watch what you say about the crown, even behind closed doors. In January 2025, the United Nations called on Thailand to repeal these laws, with multiple experts stating they have no place in a democratic country. So, this is the duality at the center of Thailand: a monarchy that is genuinely, deeply loved by a large portion of the population and legally protected by laws the UN considers an affront to human rights. The reverence is real. It is also mandatory. But how is that possible? How did Thailand build a system in which sincere devotion and legal compulsion become indistinguishable? Well, it was built deliberately, over centuries. That fusion of throne, temple, and law was born by necessity at the crossroads of faith, geopolitics, and monarchy. And Thailand arrived at that crossroads when the colonial empires arrived in Southeast Asia. Here is the most remarkable geopolitical fact about Thailand: it is the only country in Southeast Asia that was never colonized by a European power. While Burma fell to Britain, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia fell to France, and the Philippines fell to Spain and then the United States, Thailand stayed free. And that is not luck. It is one of the most sophisticated acts of sustained diplomatic performance in modern history. In the late 1800s, Thailand, then known as Siam, was squeezed between British controlled Burma to the west and French Indochina to the east. Both empires were expansionist and patient. Siam looked like the obvious next course. What happened instead was the reign of King Chulalongkorn, Rama V, who was king from 1868 to 1910. You may recognize him as the king's oldest son in Rodgers and Hammerstein's The King and I. He modernized Siam at remarkable speed, presenting it to the world as a self-governing, civilized nation that didn't need saving by colonizers, while simultaneously playing the great powers against each other. In order to do that, he strategically cultivated a personal friendship with Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, which sent an unmistakable signal to France and Britain that Siam had powerful friends. It was, in essence, a power play, a performance of friendship powerful enough to deter two colonial empires without a single shot fired. Siam still had to cede territory along its edges, tracts of land to France in the east, to Britain in the south. The trade off bought survival. The monarchy's role in this survival was then folded directly into the national mythology. The king didn't just rule Thailand, the king saved Thailand. And that narrative, sealed inside the Buddhist framework of the Dhammaraja, became the ideological engine that powers everything that came after, including, eventually, the country's relationship with the US military. Thailand had learned something in those colonial years that it would use again and again, that survival doesn't always look like resistance. Sometimes it looks like a very deliberate yes. And in the 1960s, when the world's most powerful military came looking for a staging ground, Thailand said yes again.
I'm Sergeant Major Woods, your host for this issue of The Big Picture. While the U.S. Army has many missions in many lands, the attention of our nation is focused inevitably on Army activities in one particular part of the world: Vietnam.
Here's something people don't know about the country they're visiting when they go to Thailand. Much of the physical infrastructure of Thai tourism, the airports, the hotels, the roads, the air routes, was largely built by the United States military during the Vietnam War. In the 1960s, as the war escalated next door, Thailand made a calculated decision. It partnered with the US to become a hub for what the military called rest and recuperation, R&R. Every soldier deployed to Vietnam was entitled to 1 week outside the combat zone. Thailand was one of the approved destinations, chosen for its proximity, its political stability, and its alignment with American Cold War interests. Between 1966 and 1969, tens of thousands of US soldiers spent their R&R in Thailand. Thailand understood exactly what it was doing. Hosting the US military meant hosting US money, US construction, and US geopolitical protection. In fact, the US poured an estimated $1.7 billion into Thailand through military spending and economic aid. Hotels went up, roads were paved. Bangkok became a major international air hub. The war ended in 1975. Once the soldiers left, tourism dropped briefly, but then it came back stronger than ever because the infrastructure stayed. What had been built for a military became available to everyone, including experiences you won't find on any postcards. It's worth noting what R&R in Thailand actually meant in practice. I'll give you a hint. American GIs actually called it I and I, intoxication and intercourse. And Thailand understood this well. The sex tourism industry that exists in Thailand today was seeded directly in those years, and it remains a big part of what the tourism economy sells, whether or not the brochures say so. It was during the Vietnam War that the Tourist Organization of Thailand was established, and that's when the country adopted the Land of Smiles as its tourism slogan. Then, decades later, Thailand applied that same intentionality with its food.
Widely recognized as the kitchen of the world, Thailand is unveiling a new chapter in the food industry.
In 2002, the Thai government launched the Global Thai campaign, offering subsidized loans to open Thai restaurants abroad, training chefs as cultural ambassadors, and standardizing the cuisine so deliberately that a bowl of tom kha in Chicago tastes almost identical to one in Bangkok. It's one of the most studied examples of gastrodiplomacy, the use of food as soft power, in modern history. Thailand didn't just export its cuisine, it engineered a global craving for it. Think about what Thailand has accomplished up to this point. This country understands how to adapt to the needs of the moment, how to morph to be what a country or a people or its own economy needs. Military cooperation, it's got that. Sex tourism, it's got that. Eat, pray, love resorts, it's got that. Food for the world to enjoy, it's got that. That is far more than hospitality. That is super sharp political strategy. And it has a name. There's actually a term that foreign policy scholars use for what we've been watching Thailand do across all of these moments. They call it bamboo diplomacy. The idea is simple. Bamboo is one of the strongest materials in nature, but its strength comes from its flexibility. Bamboo bends in the wind, sometimes all the way to the ground, and then it springs back. It survives precisely because it doesn't resist. Historian Arn Kozlenko calls on an ancient Siamese proverb when describing Thai diplomacy. Always solidly rooted, but flexible enough to bend whichever way the wind blows in order to survive. That was written about foreign policy, but I find that it describes everything about Thailand. Thailand's approach has nothing to do with principled neutrality, like, say, Switzerland. Instead, the goal is survival through maximum strategic usefulness. Look at history. Rama V performed modernization for European colonial powers in order to keep the country free. The Thai government hosted US military bases and turned the resulting infrastructure into a tourism economy. Western tourists wanted mindfulness and temples, and so Thailand packaged that. Chinese tourists wanted prosperity blessings and lucky amulets, and so the Mutelu economy ramped up. The pattern never changes. Identify who has the power, give them something they want, protect the core. Everywhere I looked in Thailand, I could feel the curation. The temples staged for equal parts photo ops and reverence. The hospitality fine tuned to make you feel welcome in a very specific way. The food curated to foreign palates. After a while, I started to wonder whether anything I was encountering was just itself, whether any of it exists outside the performance. I'll tell you something that probably explains why this country got under my skin the way it did. I'm of Colombian descent, and in my culture, we have our own version of the performative smile. I was raised in my own land of smiles that came with its own always be nice mentality. The warm greeting, the open door, the hospitality that makes you feel immediately at home. Colombia is genuinely like that. The warmth is real. But underneath it, like most places with a history of surviving violence and colonization and political upheaval, there is a darker story. Things that don't get said at the table. A culture that learned somewhere along the way that the smile could be a shield. And that doesn't necessarily make Colombians less authentic. They're just carrying something heavier than the surface shows. So here's what I believe: Thailand's performance of paradise is its armor, which isn't to say Thailand is inauthentic. After all, every country performs for its visitors, every nation manages what gets seen. That performance is about survival, surviving colonization, erasure, and being consumed by the tens of millions of people who visit every year wanting their own piece of Thailand. A country that has had to morph and bend while somehow keeping itself whole does not do that by accident. It does that by deciding very deliberately what it will and will not give away. Even so, with all those experiences and after all this research, I still don't know where Thailand's armor ends and its soul begins. But I don't think I'm meant to. I'll tell you what I do know. On my last full day in Chiang Rai, the general manager of the resort where I was staying invited me to join the private blessing ceremony for the hotel's anniversary.
This lady's from Atlanta, Georgia.
Hi.
She's got a podcast. She's doing an interview later, but I
Okay.
thought I invited her.
My daughter is over there.
A group of 6 monks had just arrived. I was the only stranger in the room. I had no idea what was expected of me. I just followed quietly, paid attention, and tried to be present. The lead monk was warm and even a little cheeky. He had a lightness you might expect from an elder monk. He tied a white string around my wrist gently, ceremoniously. No admission fee, no tour group. Just monks and a string and the hotel managers and me, participating in something I didn't fully understand but that felt deeply spiritual. I kept the string on my wrist for the remainder of my stay in Thailand. It carried with it blessings of protection, luck, and prosperity. It felt like I had been gifted my own piece of the armor. Because ultimately, what I know is this: Thailand gives you the smile, and behind the smile, it keeps its soul. Thank you for watching. There's a lot more coming on Globocurious, like how my time in Guangzhou, China forever changed how I think about communism and economic power, and what Taiwan's complicated identity reveals about the future of geopolitics. If this video moved you, share it with someone who needs to see it. I'm working toward 10,000 new subscribers every month, so liking this video, subscribing, and hitting the notification bell gets us there. See you next time.